Now, we're about to welcome a true legend to the show. We know Sir Michael Palin from his comedy years starring in Monty Python, but he's also spent the last 40 years travelling all over the world, most recently visiting Iraq for a new documentary series. He's here. Please welcome Sir Michael Palin.
This is nice. You put me in the middle here. So
yes.
It's my show.
Sir...
Okay.
Oh, careful.
Yes.
Take control.
We're off to a cracking start.
I'm just steadying myself.
Well, it is
Officer.
a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Lovely
Real
to
honour.
be here. Thank you.
And I have to say, when I was watching this, I was thinking I have never, ever sat down planning my yearly holiday and gone, I fancy Iraq.
No.
So what is it about these places that...
Well, you can always get a booking on the flight.
Yeah.
That's one thing. No, I mean, I've travelled a lot of the world and done some quite long journeys, North America, South America and all that. And then I thought, really, perhaps we've done enough, that genre's finished. And Channel 5 asked me to go to North Korea. So we went, got a small team together, went to North Korea, which is, you know, kind of impossible place to work in a way, because it's very controlled. And yet we managed to somehow just get the door open a little bit. And in this sort of very, very hard-line country, you found that there were people who had feelings like yourself. There was humour, you could get drunk with people if you wanted to. You know, the place existed. And I think that gave us the feeling that we'd like to go somewhere else where things appeared to be very difficult. All the headlines in the West were a country that is a failure, a disaster. And Iraq's been through 40 years of terrible civil war and you know, wars and
that's
violence.
all we hear about, really.
And that's what we hear about. And I wanted to find out what the people who actually have to live through this. And there are people who, you know, children are born, have to go to school, houses have to be built, you know, you have to get your food on the table, and what those people were like and how life went on.
And you got some access to some quite extraordinary places, like I was watching when you, with the oil and the bubbling fire, the consistent fire that's been burning.
Yeah,
so
I mean, it was the most unglamorous thing. They're going to take you to a place where the oil was first found. Yeah. And you go along, and it's a rather dour individual. They just point to a flame in the ground. It looks like someone's lit a gas fire yesterday. And there's a rather tatty sign that says the eternal flame. But apparently that has been burning there for 4,000 years. Yeah. And it was that when they came in 1927, when the British took over Iraq and were looking for oil, they said this flame is burning because there's naphtha underneath the ground, and where there's naphtha, there's possibly oil. Let's start drilling here. And they did. And they got, they struck oil almost straight away, and 90,000 gallons, apparently. Wow. The barrels, it is. 90,000 barrels a day poured out in the desert. And for a month, they didn't know what to do with it. They had no way of capping this. So that was the dramatic way they found it.
You've written all this in your book, Michael Palin, Into Iraq.
Very good. Yes, still available.
See that? So how do you... Do you do diaries when you're on your travels so that you remember all this to put in the book?
Yeah, I always keep a diary when I travel, because even if you've got a film crew and they're taking everything, in a sense, there are going to be things they miss and only you will see. And even if you leave it for 2 or 3 hours, you've actually forgotten quite what was the wording on that I liked. So...
I think you get some of your points across in a very tactful way in the book. You say that you're invited back to this house for a feast, and it's all laid out on the floor, and this is where I sympathise with you. You don't want to appear rude, but you're back, it's really uncomfortable. Yeah. And you're sitting there for hours, not wishing to offend your host, and you ask your host who's made this fabulous food, and he says, my wife and daughter. Yes. But you never get to meet
Well, that was it, really. And that was the one sad thing about Iraq, which is quite a liberal country compared to some places now. And yet, we had this wonderful, wonderful meal prepared for us by this farmer. And yet, when we said, please, can we thank your wife and your daughter-in-law for making it, and they sort of nodded, and we never saw them. They never came out. And throughout Iraq, you find this, the women are just sort of almost invisible on the streets. They're there, of course they are, but they don't have a public presence. and they don't have a loud voice. The men have the loudest voice.
But they have a load of female MPs, don't they?
They do have 25%.
Yeah.
You're well up on that.
Michael, just
25%.
speaking about females and your wife, you had a health scare in 2019.
Yes.
And I know you said your wife had concerns about you actually doing this trip.
Yeah.
And you turned into a bit of a Hansel and Gretel with leaving little clues. Can you tell us a bit more about how you broke it to her that you were actually going to go after the health scare that you've had?
Well, listen, you know, my wife, we've been together for a long, long time, and for much of our marriage, she's been giving me atlases and maps of the world and saying, when are you going to... That looks a long one, 10 months, yes. Well, I don't mind, I could manage. This time I thought I'll try it, so I left little books about Iraq and things like that around. But eventually had to confront the situation, rather the same as North Korea. You're going to somewhere which is seen as dangerous. It's seen as very difficult. And because I'd had... certainly, after going to North Korea, not as a result of North Korea, but I had to have a couple of valves fixed in my heart, so I had open heart surgery. Wow. And I think she was worried, as I was, you know, whether I'd be up to it. But actually, I felt absolutely fine, apart from one moment at the airport in Istanbul, when we were flying out to Turkey to begin the journey. And I stood up, and suddenly I felt lightheaded, and everything was swaying a bit. Oh, my God, we haven't started filming yet. I'm already passing out. But it was just hypothermia.
Does it...
I had some...
Does it ever occur to you, we were talking about slowing down in what you do, but it seems to me that you're just never going to slow down.
Well, I mean, you naturally slow down a bit, whether you like it or not.
Physically,
physically you do. Mentally, you still feel... You know, I'm like I was when I started doing the travels. And the curiosity I have about the world is still there. And it makes it quite difficult because there's so much you want to know and there's so many places you want to go to.
I worked with you. I was trying to work out when you did a railway journey. When I worked at the BBC, that must have been 1980...
1981, I think that was, or something.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
Yeah, that was one of your first...
We still look so young, don't we? Isn't it?
Have you got any little tricks you can pass on? Are you doing crosswords or wordles or what?
I'm very good at reading wine labels.
That's why you fit in on this panel. Well, can I just say, it's a brilliant book, Michael Palin Into Iraq. Go and get it now. And thank you so much for joining us.
Lovely.
It's such a pleasure.
Very nice to be here.
Palin.
Thank you very much. Thank you.